Thank you very much for having me. Hi, I'm Hugh. I'm from the University of Manchester, as we've just said. So I work in the student recruitment team, but I did used to work in admissions. So I was trying to work out how many of these personal statements I'd read in my time, and I think I got to 12,000, I think. So yeah, it's changing, but we've done a lot of this over time. So we're going to be able to take the kind of this into account when looking at what we're trying to see from prospective students, like the people that are with you. So this session is very much going to focus on what we're looking for in general. I'm going to talk a little bit about the admissions process as well and some timelines, just so that you can take those into account. Um, so it's very much kind of all about the admissions process. So, we're going to talk initially about what UCAS is, just very briefly, just because that informs the whole process and it obviously includes the personal statement as part of that. We're going to look at the purpose of the personal statement, so I'm going to kind of get you to look at it from the university perspective so that students can make themselves as strong a candidate as possible. And then we'll get into the top tips and kind of things to consider. There have been changes with the personal statement, so what I'm going to cover today will be the new changes for 2026 entry, so for anyone in year 12 essentially. Where it's going to be broken down into 3 questions. I'm going to cover what we'd like to see and what different universities would like to see from there before we kind of finish off with a few top tips afterwards. So UCAS is a university and colleges admission service, and the personal statement is a big part of that application to university. But there's lots of other elements to the application as well that we'll be looking for as a university. So it is the way that students will be applying. If they haven't done it already, they'll be creating an account for the UCAS Hub. There'll be lots of support from the school to do this. But for any parents and guardians here as well, then I would also say it's a good set of guidance and resources. And if you've got any questions, you're uncertain about anything in the process, it's very likely there's a section of the UCAS website that will explain it in great detail. So it isn't just an application portal. There's actually a lot more there that I would encourage you to take a look at. It's very much a deadline-driven process. So for us as a university, it started back in April, so we're about a month into it, where the UCAS course search went live. Actually, our courses at Manchester went live in March time, so we do it then. But that's when most of the courses went live, and so students can actually start as of last week, a week today, to put their application together. They're actually able to start creating and pulling it together. They won't be sending it off until September, so that's the earliest that students will actually be able to submit their application. And the date that they'll apply, the final deadline, will depend on the courses and universities that they're applying to. So there's 2 different entries. They both, well, the entry is in September normally, although you can apply for deferred entry as well, so the year after. But the deadlines are either in October if students are applying for medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, or either Oxford or Cambridge. You can only apply for one. Or alternatively, the deadline will be in January. So the deadline mid-January is for every other course, basically. So there isn't a advantage to applying early, but we do recommend that you do. So it does mean that students can kind of get that application out of the way. They can get their personal statement done. They can focus on getting the grades that universities will be asking for. And so there will also be internal deadlines in the school as well. I think that's mid-November for kind of the main application. Obviously much earlier than that for early applicants, but the more you can do in the summer, the more you can do in advance of getting back into school in next autumn, the stronger the students would tend to be and the easier it is for them, so they can just focus on the grades and other things that they've got going on. Students have a little while then afterwards to decide kind of where they would like to go. They will have heard back from us. They will have a decision on their application, whether it's a conditional offer, so conditional on getting certain grades, for example. That would be, they would hear back from us by May, probably much earlier than that, but that's kind of the final deadline that they would have from us. But then students have got a little while to decide where they want to pick as their top choice and their insurance choice, their backup as well. And that would be in June. But it's very important to stick to those deadlines. So the mid-May deadline, mid-November deadline, sorry, for kind of internal applications, so that the school and college can provide as much support as possible when pulling things like the academic reference together. So there's different sections that they will support with as well. So looking at it from a university perspective, we'll focus a lot more on the personal statement, don't worry. But these are kind of the key things that we as a university are looking for. So this is for Manchester, this is what's in our admissions criteria, but it's very much the same everywhere, to be honest. We're looking for knowledge, understanding of the course, that you kind of students will know what they're getting into and what to expect. We want to see their ability to contribute as an academic part of our community. We want to see that they're interested and enthusiastic in the course that they're going for, and the personal statement is a really good way of being able to show that. We want to see their potential and what they can do in the future with us. And overall, we're trying to get a measure of their academic ability. How are they going to be like as a student with us? So that's kind of the things that we're looking for generally. However, obviously, we're going to be looking at particular things. So we'll look at their predicted grades. That can be A levels or BTECs or anything. Academic performance in the past. So traditionally, that would be their GCSE performance. That will matter more or less. It really does depend on the course and the university, but we will always look at it. The personal statement is going to be obviously the big part of this presentation today, and that is the student's chance to really explain and show their motivation, their passions, their interests, their understanding and knowledge of the course that are applying for. And it should be very relevant to them. And the clue is in the name, it is a personal statement, so it is our chance to find out a little bit more about them. There'll be an academic reference, which is from the school or college, which is essentially giving us a bit of context to that student, and helps us understand if there's any mitigating or exceptional circumstances that we need to be aware of as well. And then for the other courses, there may also be interviews or admissions tests. So part of what I encourage students to do is do their research, kind of know what to expect. Sometimes it's all just based on the application and the personal statement. Other times there may be additional steps, but that research into looking into what they might come to expect or what kind of things we might be asking from them will be really, really helpful. So now we're focusing very much on the personal statement, as you'd expect. So it's one of the parts of the application, as I've already mentioned, and it is our chance to really understand and see students' knowledge of and motivation for. What we want to do is have a student who knows what they're getting into, so what they're going to be doing for 3, 4, or 5 years of their life, potentially, depending on what course they're applying for. But we also want someone that's going to stick with us and stay on that course, so that they're prepared for it in many ways. Generally, what we're looking for in the personal statement is their skills and experiences. That's kind of what we're looking for primarily, so to show kind of what they've done to help deepen their understanding and what that course means to them. But everything in the personal statement should really add relevance, should kind of tell us something about that student and particularly about how it's related to the course. So don't just tell me something for the sake of it. It should all be very relevant, very much appropriate to what they're applying to. In terms of key features, so some things to be aware of. So I'm going to talk about the questions in a little while, but the length of the personal statement actually hasn't changed. So it's still going to be 4,000 characters, but they'll be separated across 3 questions. Students can put as much or as little, well, not as little, they have to put something of each of them in the 3 questions. And in part, it will depend on the courses they're applying to and the universities they're applying to as to which areas and which questions may be more important. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. You can't make it longer than that, so if you try and write above 4,000 characters, it'll literally stop you midway through question 3. And you have to put a minimum of 350 characters in any one of the boxes. You can't leave one of the questions empty, essentially. Students will just write one personal statement, so students really have to be careful that personal statement makes sense across all of their choices. Students have up to 5 choices. A choice is normally kind of a course, so maybe 5 different courses at 5 different universities. So I want to do English at 5 different places. It can be a combination of things though. So if, for example, you can apply for 2 courses at one university and then 1 course at others, as I did when I applied to Manchester back in the day. So it's very much about making sure that one personal statement makes sense across all of those choices. And students have to rely on the content, what they're actually saying, rather than the formatting. So if they try and put a lovely quote in italics, or they put things underlined or bold to emphasize them, it's going to get completely removed. You have to rely on the structure and the content rather than kind of how it's laid out, and kind of how it appears. It's very much about what's written rather than how it's written in many ways. So in terms of kind of why there is one, so before we get into the practicalities, it really helps us understand suitability for the course. That's broadly what we're looking for. It really shows us that relevant experience, and relevance is key, as I've mentioned already. And just to emphasize, it's a one thing that isn't grades and numbers and letters, and it's very much a really helpful tool for us to build a picture of what a student is like and what they've done outside of their kind of main studies. In terms of what and how we're looking at it, primarily, as I've said, we're looking for those skills and motivations. That's kind of what we're looking for. But we use it at a multitude of stages. So we use it in lots of different ways. Obviously, we read it as part of every application. How much we focus on it at that stage will vary. Some courses, like law or economics at Manchester, it's a really big part of the initial assessment. It's very much something that we focus on really, really carefully and care a lot about, because we really want to make sure that students are applying for those courses and have an understanding of what those courses will be. For other subjects, we will talk and ask about them more at interview. So something like physics, for example, they will base some of the interview questions on what has been submitted as part of the personal statement, and they're very much focused on the subject itself and how students have prepared themselves for that subject. So that's how it would work at Manchester, for example, for that subject. For other courses, we will look at it at results confirmation, as well as when we first receive the application, because if someone's narrowly missed their grades, a strong personal statement could be a deciding factor if we're going to actually go on to accept them or not, because we've got the flexibility sometimes to do that. But sometimes we will look back at what students have done or said or explained in their personal statement. Sometimes there are additional forms or processes that are used. We used to do this for medicine and dentistry at Manchester. We no longer do, but it's always worth checking to see if there's something similar to a personal statement that students might be asked for as well. In terms of joint courses, students can absolutely apply for joint courses and talk about this as part of their personal statement. And so if students are applying for a multitude of different subjects or a couple of different things that are very related, it's very much about focus on what's the overlap, how are they related to each other. So if, for example, a student was applying for English or English and creative writing or English and American studies in the example here, there's a lot of overlap between those subjects. However, and I have seen this, where students are applying for very different subjects, it just weakens their application. So particularly with this new structure, it makes it more difficult. And so if you're applying for, in this case, biology and law, I think the most extreme example I ever saw, thankfully it didn't get past the draft personal statement stage, was journalism, geography, and dentistry, and trying to pull together a personal statement on all of those, it just weakens it. Each department thinks that you don't want to do their course, and fundamentally what we want is a student who knows what their course is and is prepared for it. And if they're talking about other subjects other than our subject, that will just perhaps weaken their application. So being as focused as possible at the application stage, and particularly in the personal statement, is the best advice I can give here. But generally, we're encouraging students not to panic. It's a bit weird here to have a kind of a stop, calm down section of a presentation, but we can appreciate that a personal statement can be a very, very stressful thing. It's the first time that students might have been asked to create an essay about themselves in this kind of way, and it's kind of just as a bit of reassurance that we're not trying to catch them out. We're trying to see the students have an understanding of the course and that subject and have the skills and enthusiasm to succeed, but we're not trying to trip them up. We're not trying to kind of trap them in many ways. So with students, we encourage them to kind of make sure they've got enough time. There is plenty of time left in the process. This is a good time of year to start this off, and the more that students can do between now and the summer, the better position they'll be in terms of having done a lot of the work. But don't be too stressed about it. Don't have it taken over your lives in many ways. So we want, as long as you follow the guidance we're talking about today, as long as you get the support from the school that you can get, then you'll be in a really good position, and there's not much else you can do. And it's only one part of the application overall. So when we're kind of talking to students about writing their personal statement, there's kind of different elements of kind of where they're up to. So students will tend to be at one of three phases: the researching phase, which is probably where most of the students in the room and or the parent or the children of the people in the room will be at, because this is very early days. Some students might be drafting and pulling together their personal statement, but I can imagine there's not that many people who have kind of finished a first draft or kind of working through a second. It is very much an ongoing process for many students. So in researching kind of what students can do now is very much pull together stuff they've already got. So they can start to write down and jot down examples of things that they've done, books that they've read, events that they've attended. Very much about trying to explain why they want to study the course. Sometimes that can be easier out loud. So I have heard students kind of explain to someone in a conversation and maybe record that and make a note of it. But this is kind of at the very early stages. And this means that where there are gaps, where there are things that students think, actually, I don't know as much about that as I thought I did, or I don't know X, Y, or Z, this gives them the time to kind of expand on that and kind of flesh their personal statement out a little bit more. So there's plenty of time to do that. At the drafting stage, it's getting it down on the page. It's going to be a draft process. You're going to do this a few times, but it's getting it down on the page and using the best and strongest examples. So not just everything, but which is most effective. Students can use, should be very wary about using anything like AI. I'll talk about this a little bit later on. There are some ethical ways to use it. So for example, you can get it to proofread things occasionally, or you can use it to create examples of resources that you might be able to go and read separately yourself, but do not use AI for anything more than that. It will be something that runs the risk of it getting flagged, and it kind of defeats the object of the personal statement, which is to help students get and understand if this is the right course for them. I'll talk more about that later on though. And if they're kind of at a reviewing stage, you make the most of everyone that's around you. Second pair of eyes is always really, really helpful. So this is where parents and guardians might be able to help as well. So proofreading and attention to detail can be really key because you're going to do this a couple of times and students will glaze over. I certainly did when the first time I wrote a personal statement. So you'll miss errors the second or third draft because it's the same words to you. So very much something to kind of bear in mind in getting different perspectives and getting all the support that you can. So that's why starting early is generally quite helpful. So 3 questions. Let's go into these in a bit more detail now. So section 1 is, why do you want to study this course or subject? Why is this the right course for you? Section 2 is, how have your qualifications and studies helped prepare you for this course or subject? And then section 3 is, what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? As I mentioned earlier on, students can weight these kind of however they wish, and it will depend on the course that they're applying to as to kind of what they might focus on. I will go into this in a bit more detail later on, but my general advice would be to focus more on sections 1 and 2 if it's a more academic related course. So if it's kind of more focused on an academic subject, where it's more vocational, so maybe if it's more medicine or nursing or something that's kind of more work based, then you may want to put more in section 3 as well. But everything throughout the whole personal statement should be relevant, showing me something about you and your preparation for the course. So let's go into a bit more of a deep dive on each of those sections now. So for section 1, it's, why do you want to study this course or subject? And that's fundamentally what we're looking for, the why. There's many ways that students can do this, but a clear motivation for studying the course should come across. So I kind of want to understand the real reasons why someone wants to do this degree, but also what understanding and knowledge do they have in that? And so thinking through practical examples of either a skill that they've got that's relevant to the course, or an example of an experience or event that they had that they attended or did that kind of shows how they've gone out of the way to learn more about a new subject, or that's deep in understanding of something that they already did. Because what we want to see is that a student is a good fit for this course and that it's something they'll want to do. So this first thing is, for some of our courses at Manchester, it's the most important thing actually. Some of our courses, and where there's any nuance or differences, we'll put that in the course profiles, we'll say what we're looking for in the personal statement, but for some of them it is the most important part, because we want to make sure that we're getting students who really understand what they're getting into. So why do you want to do it? What skills and knowledge do you have to prepare you for it? One thing to avoid is cliche. So I've always wanted to do, I don't know, geology. I always feel mean for geology because I always use this as an example. But I've always been interested in for as long as I can. I'm applying for this course. It just takes away some of the uniqueness and power of that personal statement and that application. So try and avoid. So it's not going to be the end of the world if students do use one, but it's just something to try and try not to fall into the trap of using in a second or a third draft. So give me the reasons why. It could be that conversation that you record that I mentioned earlier on, or that kind of more natural flow of explaining why you want to do a subject is a good way of writing it down. It really depends on the student, but avoiding cliche is one thing to avoid, and that tends to happen in the first section, the opening paragraph. And so students kind of need to be able to explain what their motivations are. So if you're a parent or a guardian or someone around them, I would encourage you to have that conversation. It sometimes helps students expand on the reasons why they want to do that subject and kind of flesh out the reasons why it's the right choice for them. Section 2 is kind of how have your qualifications and studies helped you prepare for this course or subject. So this is going to be usually quite a hefty part of the application, but one thing to consider is you don't always have to read this literally. It doesn't have to be exactly what you're studying now and kind of how it's preparing you. So for example, if you're applying for, I don't know, a foundation year in engineering, but you're doing history, geography, and French, then you'll have less direct experiences from your current A levels, but you're going into a qualification that's going to really be absolutely fine for you because it's designed to help students that are completely changing their mind. That would be absolutely not a problem. So your studies that you're currently doing don't have to always relate. And so if that's the case, then you'll probably want to look at what independent research that you've done or something that you've kind of done separately or further reading that you've gone out of your way to do that is kind of the super curricular, so stuff that's focused on the subject but not that you're directly being taught. That'll be the kind of way to stand out. For the most competitive courses, it's that independent research part of it that is very effective, because, for example, I'm using another physics example, but if you're applying to physics and you're talking about your A levels in physics and maths, that's great, but everyone else will also be talking about their A levels in physics and maths because they'll be needed everywhere. So things that you can show that are more in depth, that are more super curricular, kind of shows that you've gone out of your way to learn more beyond just your academic subjects that you're learning in school or college can be really, really helpful. You can talk about skills here as well, so that's a good thing to be able to include. So there's lots of things that you can talk about, and any relevant, and relevant is that key, educational or academic achievements. So it could be competitions, it could be additional reading, it could be podcasts, things that show a depth of academic understanding, that shows that depth of knowledge in that course or subject in many ways. There's so many ways that you can do it. I'm not going to list the whole way, but this whole section is about academic skills primarily. And so it would tend to be a greater focus on the supercurricular that will help, particularly for the most competitive courses and universities where they're more of an academic focused, because it really shows us that depth and knowledge and kind of depth of enthusiasm as well. For other courses, it may be the extracurricular, and that'll probably be something you may focus on more in the third section, which we'll go on to in a second. So it very much is a case of students looking at the courses they're applying for and just doing a little bit of research to understand which they should focus a bit more on. There's not a one size fits all, but for the majority of courses, it will tend to be focusing on the academic. So the third section will be what else have you done to prepare yourself out of education and why are these experiences useful? So this can be anything. Students that are doing work experience placements, like some of the students that have just been off today, fantastic, really good opportunity to kind of understand the world of work and tying those back into why it's relevant and what skills they've gained and how it ties into the course will be really, really useful. I should say that the majority of time we do not expect students to have work experience, so please don't think it's a barrier there. However, if you do have it, it's a great time to be able to include that in this third section. There could be other examples of personal life experiences, other responsibilities, other achievements, and again, the thing I would say is that it should be relevant. You need to tie it back into the course, particularly for things like hobbies or extracurricular interests, because people and students are often really enthusiastic and interested in them, but we don't want to see it for the sake of it. You need to tell us how it's going to help prepare them for the course. So although this section is going to be useful for some vocational courses, I would say there's a risk that students will put too much in this one. So I would say this third question for the majority of courses will tend to need to be a little bit shorter than questions 1 or 2. It will vary, but that's my advice, that normally focus on questions 1 and 2 generally for the majority of students. And so these are the kind of skills that students can think about from their hobbies, interests, kind of things that they've done. That really will depend on the course as to which transferable skills are going to be the most useful, but it's all about that relevance. So tell us what you've done, tell us what you've reflected on, we learned from it, and then how it's related to the course. There's many ways you can do that, but that relevance really makes it a stronger application overall. There's lots of ways to kind of show this, and I'm not going to go through this in tons of detail, but in terms of kind of thinking through some examples of ways to kind of flesh out a structure of answering a question, or how to give an example in the personal statement, then you've got the STAR method. So what was the situation, what was the task, kind of what was the challenge related to, what was the action, what was the thing that the student then did, and what was the result. So this is a way of fleshing out an example so that students don't just tell us what they've done, but they kind of expand on that. This is a way of making fewer, stronger examples than ever trying to list everything they've ever done, which is something that does happen as well. ABC is another way that you can answer it. So this is activity, benefit, and course. So what did you do? What did you learn from it? And how is it going to help you in the future? So it just means that it's that last step that really helps, where your students are really thinking through, how is it going to show a skill that I need, and what skill is that showing for me? And so this isn't a very formulaic way of answering it, but it's kind of making students go that extra step to make their application stand out, that extra step to make it a little bit stronger. In general, there's some top tips to consider. So before we kind of go through a few little things and then go to the Q&A towards the end. First of all, it's relevance. And I'm sorry that you've heard me say that word far too many times. It's very much about making it relevant, making sure that the personal statement is telling me something about the student and their likelihood to succeed on the course that they're applying to. Students can be organised and plan it out. This is a good time of year to start and make the most of it. Time goes very quickly in this 2 years of college, and therefore being organised, doing timelines, seeing when they need to have done their first draft for, what kind of support they can get is really key. Being specific is really helpful as well. So this could be anywhere from being really specific about the reason why a student wants to do the course to, for example, if a student is in section 2, then they can, for example, focus on a specific part of their A-level potentially that they're really interested in, and then going into what stuff they've learned about that particular topic in greater depth beyond that. So the specificity, the really detailed elements of it can be really useful there, and honest is really helpful. A personal statement is personal, as I said earlier, and it's really nice to see the explanation or story or how students have got to this point and why they want to do this. It is really much more interesting. Write clearly. Kind of use spelling and grammar checks, get someone else to check over it is really helpful. And one of the things to emphasize, and it's one of the things that students are starting to ask me most now, is put it in. If you've got a good example, don't worry exactly where it lives. So if it's in question 2 or in question 1, because it's an element of academic reading that's made you interested in that course, it doesn't matter. Include it wherever you feel it fits. And that will be a good strong example. Don't worry about it exactly how it works. We're still in early days of working this out as a university. This is all the guidance I'm giving you today is based on all of the information that we've got from our admissions tutors who have been through this, so that's really good. But for example, for us at Manchester, we're actually going to receive the personal statement as one big block still. There might be slight demarcations, there might be slight gaps or sections, breaks, but it's going to read a little bit like it has always done. So please do not worry overly as to where something should go, which box it should fit into, because the reality is that in many universities it might still kind of look like it used to as well. What to avoid. So the things not to do, don't tell jokes. I'm sure many of my admissions colleagues and academic tutors have amazing sense of humour. Doesn't always come across on the written word. So it should be authentic and it should be a little bit formal, but it's that's kind of a tone to avoid. So jokes don't always land well, shall I say. Students don't need to go overboard with thesaurus. They are smart. They don't need to prove they're smart. That might sound a bit stupid, but the number of personal statements I've seen where students must have gone through and changed every other word into a word they would never use in their everyday life. Good, strong examples. Going to find examples that they can add in if they've got gaps, that makes it stronger. Trying to use flowery language just for the sake of it in a way they would never do normally doesn't really help that much. Students, if they're ever tempted to list things, if they want to have another lovely bullet pointed list of everything, shouldn't. If you've done that, then you've probably got too many examples of things and you need fewer of them and the ones that are more effective, and go into those in more depth and tying them back to the course. So listing things can be a little bit difficult. And the alternative, so I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter exactly where it goes always. It very much does matter if you repeat yourself. So you're wasting space. You're using fewer strong examples. Even if you think an example is good in section 1 and section 2, do not put it in both. Put it in one or the other, and then think of other examples that you can draw into for each of the 3 sections. So there is a habit of thinking and answering questions where students might be tempted to kind of repeat themselves more than they used to. The changes that UCAS introduced for the personal statement are there to guide students. They describe it as scaffolding in many ways. So please do think of it as an overall statement, but use those sections to emphasize and pick out what is most useful for that course. And in terms of aspiration, in terms of what students want to do with that course, great thing to include. There's a whole section for it in section 1, the why. However, don't let that take everything over. So I'd still want students to show an academic interest in the course, why they want to do that thing for its own sake. So you want to be barrister, fantastic, but include that as part of your reasoning. Don't let it to overtake everything. It can be something that can kind of overwhelm a personal statement in the past. Whether or not it will anymore, who knows? It's important to stick to the facts as well. So I'm sure no students would ever want to kind of exaggerate or borrow from other examples. But this is a little bit of an older example now, but I still think it's really relevant. 234 people had this very interesting experience, which is ever since I accidentally burnt holes in my pajamas after experimenting with a chemistry set on my 8th birthday, I've always had a passion for science. This did not happen to 234 different people. It was an example that was very commonly used a number of years ago now, so it's a while ago. And students thought, great, I'm going to borrow that. It's great. It really does show my interest and passions, and it seems realistic. But it gets flagged. There's a real risk of that. This is particularly a danger nowadays with AI, where they're borrowing examples and you do not know where those examples have come from. So please do make sure that your personal statement is your own work. And if you're looking at examples or using AI, then it's very much dangerous in many ways in terms of your application, and UCAS reserves the right to cancel your application as well, or universities may be able to ask for a second personal statement draft, for example. So I'm not sure any students would intend to do this here, but it's very much a thing to avoid, and do it in your own voice and do it in your own way, and that's always much more effective anyway. In terms of sharing circumstances, I mentioned earlier on when talking about the different elements of the application, kind of what to include and what not to, but anything to do with extenuating or mitigating circumstances, family illness, all sorts of things, obviously speak to the school or college first. They'll speak to the exam board, that's important to do, but we can make sure we can include that in the reference, so the tutors at the college will be able to add that in. There's a section for it there, and that means that the personal statement can focus on potential and skill and interest in the course rather than having to explain stuff like this, which can go in the reference instead. There may be other processes, maybe other forms that you may need to complete, but speak to your tutor in the first instance, and that's a really good starting point. I should also say that we really encourage students to declare if they have an access need or disability. It's completely separate to the way that we consider the application, so it has no impact on kind of what we're going to be looking at or what decisions that we make, but it does mean that we can put that support in place for students. So please do declare that. It does make your life better in the long run, because we can make sure we can make reasonable adjustments and support students when they begin with us. It's just one of those things that often students don't feel comfortable in doing, but it's never going to be a bad thing. I can encourage you with that. So, other thing to consider as we're heading towards the end now is very much about making decisions. So making sure that you've chosen a good set of universities that you're comfortable with. You've looked at the admissions process, and if you're not sure about anything, ask us. We're here to help. And so if you're not sure, then there are admissions teams at all universities that you can ask, whether it's about the structure of the personal statements and what they're looking for, or whether it's something else about the course structure. If in doubt, ask. There's no such thing as a stupid question. The same for today as well. It's definitely something you can kind of make the most of me being here. And now it's over to students, essentially. So it's very much about students doing their research. That research really shows. I can see an excellent personal statement and an okay personal statement, and often it comes down to how much research a student has done into that subject and how much depth and what examples they can use. Making it relevant, making that point again, is really, really helpful, and focused on the course that they're applying to. So always making it as course specific as possible is really, really useful. And make the most of time. There is quite a lot of time to go, but that goes very quickly, as I've mentioned. So sticking to those internal deadlines, either at the start of term for early applicants or mid-November, well before the UCAS deadlines, is going to be really helpful to make sure that students get all the support that they are entitled to and that they need. I'm not going to talk too much about Manchester, but just to say, if you do want to get any kind of student feedback or views from our students, you can do that on our course profiles. This is the same thing for many other universities as well, and I would encourage you to find out what students think about the courses that you're interested in studying. So get that student view. Don't just get the staff view, do see what the students are saying as well. And if you can do try and visit places. Our open days are in June, so just over a month now, the 21st and 28th of June. But if you're going anywhere, then try and visit. I'm not appreciate you're not going to go to all 5 necessarily, but it really is a determinant in finding out if you're going to enjoy your time there. So students come to Manchester, think, amazing, this is such a busy, vibrant place, and some students think, this isn't quite for me, it's too busy, too much going on. So visiting and going to open days is one way to kind of help you decide. So that's me having talked at you quite quickly about the personal statement. Hopefully that was clear. But does anyone have any questions? I think you can add them into the chat. Oh, Louise has popped up, sorry.
I have indeed, Hugh, yes. That was absolutely a whistle-stop tour of personal statements, but also some really, really handy advice for students and parents to focus on, I think, what is really important at this stage with the personal statements. There's an awful lot to think about, but actually it is keep it simple and keep it relevant is, I think, the really good advice that you've given. We did have a couple of questions in advance. You have pretty much answered most of those, the content of those, but I'm going to ask you just to clarify one thing, please, for us, Hugh, if you would. Early and late entries, can you talk a little bit more just about the early entries so that any students who are considering applying for those can just understand a little bit more about, just the formal process? I know it's not the individual expectation just of Manchester, but, just the approach to it. We have our own team in the college as well who assists with early entries specifically, but that would be really helpful just for anybody who's not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll stop sharing my screen as well so you can actually see my face a normal colour.
Thank you.
There we go.
That's great.
Fantastic. So yeah, early entry obviously will be for typically students that are often applying for Oxford and Cambridge or for medicine, dentistry, and veterinary science. So these tends to be either really competitive universities or for very competitive courses. So I'm going to separate those two. So I'm kind of going to do Oxbridge for a bit, and then I'll talk about the others afterwards, because they are quite different groups of students, even if you apply at the same time. So if you're applying for Oxford or Cambridge, obviously there may be additional tests sometimes with Oxford and Cambridge, and so therefore the format of which, so you have to decide which way you want to go, because you can only apply for one, so you have to decide what you want to do with it. And in general, they are very much focused on the super curricular. So when I mentioned focusing on sections 1 and 2, they are going to be all about focusing on sections 1 and 2, particularly section 2, where they really want to understand your depth of knowledge and understanding in that subject in particular. So you need to stand out to some extent, and so there's many ways that you can do that, but I would say that it's that independent research, and so if you're doing EBQ, or you can do some additional reading, or kind of a more structured way of going into researching that subject in greater depth, that really helps, because it kind of shows that you're able to do these things off your own back, and you're able to kind of be independent and be driven and enthusiastic and motivated in those subjects. They will also be really useful for us, so please don't worry. We know if you're applying in maybe September time, early October, that you'll be applying for Oxford and Cambridge. That has no impact on us. It doesn't matter at all, and that will be the case for every other university. We don't know where else you've applied until you decide where you want to go as your firm and insurance choice, and it doesn't matter, so please do not worry about that one. Medicine, dentistry, veterinary science. I can talk about medicine, dentistry, less veterinary science, unfortunately. These are very specific courses, and we receive lots of applications, and we need to get through those applications earlier. So because for these kind of courses there's often additional tests, so for us it would be the UCAT, which you do some medicine and dentistry. We need to get that application in early so that we can match up your application, your personal statement, everything there with your UCAT score. Then we rank everyone's UCAT score, and then we look at your interview performance, and they'll interview you and then make an offer after that one. So but you apply early because there's multiple stages to the application, rather than just looking at that kind of set of details about you and your name and course and grades. It's looking at you as a person in much greater depth in many ways. And so for those, it would be a case of looking at the universities that students are applying to, looking at the slight differences they will have between them. As an example, for both medicine and dentistry, we quite a UCAT heavy university, so we look at the test in detail, and we interview more than most universities, so we interview probably 12 to 1500 students, and therefore kind of being confident and having work experience and voluntary work will mean that students will tend to be stronger for those kind of things. The same skills work for students applying for other courses. If you're not applying for Oxford and Cambridge, you're applying for any course at any other university that isn't medicine, dentistry, or veterinary science. Obviously, you've got that later deadline, but the same skills and the same concepts apply. So you can do as good, as strong an application as anyone else. You just don't have to do it quite as early, but the earlier you can do it means that you can get it out of the way in many ways. So hopefully that was what you wanted.
So brilliant. Thank you very much, Hugh. That's great clarification. And I think visiting the universities and looking certainly at using Unifrog, which we have as a platform for students and for parents. Parents have access to that as well as the individual university websites and UCAS and any of the other kind of search engines, which there are plenty of around that are very well respected, will tell you a lot about the courses, what it's really like. But there's nobody quite like the existing students on the course. So you are absolutely spot on with our own recommendation that either by the chat function for universities to speak to one of the uni buddies or one of the students, as well as academics and outreach. But certainly at open days, just really gathering that information and getting the feel for why you want to go for this course and why you want to go for that university or that set of universities. And then I think the guidance you've given on the personal statements itself and how to kind of make those relevant is really good. We'll circulate that presentation if that's okay, Hugh.
Yeah, of course.
You can send us that and we'll do that. But even if you're considering applying for an apprenticeship route as well as university, all of this is really, really good groundwork. So from a college perspective, from a careers advice and guidance perspective, Faye and I really recommend that every student goes through this process wholeheartedly and committed to understand the different sections, the different reasons why you're going for these courses, and using that as a motivation as well. Outside of that, if you're going to apply in addition to universities, the STAR technique, all of this is really good learning about yourself, your motivation, your different interest in subjects, and what you've done around that, both extracurricular and supercurricular. So that's really, really great advice. Thank you. We haven't got any other questions in addition to those that we had, and you have addressed all of those, Hugh, so thank you very much indeed. If nobody else has any questions, then please do, by all means, contact us at careers@keds.ac.uk, whether you're a parent or student. We can forward any of those, if that's okay, to Hugh to answer subsequently. We'll circulate the recording. But what I would say is that Faye and myself, I'm Lou Harper, one of the careers advisors, and Faye Lowe, who's also with us putting the links in the chat, are very happy to answer any queries that come through the careers mailbox, and students can have a one-to-one appointment after half term if they want to send in anything for that. Hugh, have you got anything else that you'd like to add? Otherwise, we'll wrap up, because that's really neat and tidy. And we're very, very grateful for the real detail that you've given us.
No worries. The only thing I've got is to back you up a little bit. So I work with lots of different schools and colleges, so I do this a lot. And my only ever plea is students make the most of the support that's there. There's so much guidance, and these sessions are much more effective now than if students come back after the summer holidays and kind of are now thinking through, oh, I'm not quite sure what I want to do, and I've been thinking about this over the summer. Make the most of the support now. Make the most of the support in the autumn, because it's easier than later on. So definitely, that's my only play.
Thank you very much, Hugh. And just for information, there are all the pre-recordings, recorded sessions on all of our other speaker series, which have been on student finance and SEND support, etc. So students and parents can get hold of that on the careers tab of our website, looking under the recorded events. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really grateful. Hugh is a great support to the college and to all of our students, and we hope that you go and visit the University of Manchester along with the others, but particularly we know that students fare really well at your university. So thank you for looking out for us today, and in the future I know you'll be supporting our students at the HE Fair, etc. as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, and good night to everybody. Thank you.